Ladies and gentlemen, RosterWatch Nation, welcome back to the epic RosterWatch Podcast, brought to you by RosterWatch.com. My name is Alex Dunlap, here with Byron Lambert, as we are breaking down what happened over the course of this weekend, or this long weekend, Thursday through Saturday, with the NFL Draft, the fantasy fallout, the Dynasty Rookie Cheat Sheet, which will be up at RosterWatch.com at some point today, version 1.0. We have the skeleton ready to go, but there's a ton of things I'll need to talk to Byron about as far as how the slotting works there with that. Quick reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could subscribe on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, and most importantly, if you could just comment underneath this video, that really helps a lot with our robot genius overlords, we've been told. We'll make sure and comment back to you, but helps with the algorithm. So if for nothing else, just say, hey, I'm doing it for the algorithm, or I'm doing it because Byron's shirt's wacky or whatever. It doesn't matter what the comment says. Just comment something and we'd appreciate it. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you could rate and review there, give us a 5-star rating, would be greatly appreciated. All right, Byron, with that said, let's just get into it. I'm sure that the talk about the structure of the Dynasty Rookie Cheat Sheet will come up as we go over some of these talking points, but what is it that you got that you want to hit just kind of right off here as we come out of the NFL Draft?
Well, I mean, first things first, when I did have a chance to open the beta version of V1.0 of the Dynasty Rookie Draft Cheat Sheet, Alex, that we'll be publishing here on the site here shortly, I was actually very surprised at how closely, essentially how closely we have all the guys ranked right out of the gate for version 1.0. So that was interesting to me, because a lot of times we can be a little bit all over the place, but I guess we've been doing this for too long together. We share a lot of similar thoughts. So I wouldn't even say, maybe I've got some nitpicks. I'd call them more observations that we'll definitely get into over the course of the pod. But yeah, first, just a few interesting narratives and talking points that I thought came out of the draft, mostly as it relates to fantasy. I think some of these are kind of obvious. I think a few of these are maybe narratives that you just haven't heard so much discussion about. We like to get into stuff that's a little bit different here at Roster Watch, give you guys a unique perspective at things. And so obviously, Alex, I think a common sentiment coming out of the draft is that RB1 in terms of fantasy and, rookie running backs, dynasty, it looks like it's a 2-horse race between Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathon Taylor. In terms of the wide receiver group, feel very comfortable saying that CeeDee Lamb has kind of solidified as wide receiver 1 of the rookie crop, especially, I think in redraft and maybe in terms of a dynasty, especially. That's kind of where our head's at right now. But, that said, I think there's a whole Jalen Reagor hive out there that's making a ton of noise right now. And, that's rightfully so. There's a lot of reason for that hype. The Denver Broncos and the Oakland Raiders going absolutely ham at the wide receiver position in this draft, early and often. Taking 3 wide receivers each. We're talking about Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards and Lynn Bowden in Oakland, and then with Denver. Let's see, they went Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler there in Denver. Alex, sorry,
they also went Albert O, though, so it's kind of they added the 3 receiving options.
Another pass catcher there, receiving option. So they really did a lot for Drew Lock. So those 2 things stood out to me. I thought that they got good players and they know they're competing with Patrick Mahomes in that division. Much like I think the Cowboys know that ultimately they're going to be, no matter what, they're going to have to score points this year. And, same reason for Lamb there. Ironically, our guy Denzel Mims, fell precipitously in the draft, Alex. I mean, as precipitously as
I'm not sure
to be he's still a second round pick, but considering
it was the end of the second. It was the end of the second. He slipped in the second. For some reason, I was sitting here thinking he was an early third. It was second, though, wasn't it? I think it was.
Just went behind a whole slew of guys that, I guess was unexpected for a lot of observers, and maybe went against a lot of the kind of the industry rankings in terms of the media and the draftnik types out there. Anyways, it's been an outstanding process, but I just thought it was ironic that Denzel Mims had this quote unquote, fall and in the draft kind of plummeting below some of those guys. But in the end, Alex, I mean, I think you can make the case he landed in one of the absolute best landing spots and kind of catapults him right back up the board post-draft.
Yeah. Okay. So those were your talking points. All right. So let's just start at the more
here. A couple more.
Okay,
real quick,
fine.
Alex.
Let's hear them.
Adam Troutman to the New Orleans Saints. That was a big development. Obviously the future of the quarterback situation will have a lot to do with how that works out in Dynasty. But Adam Troutman, a guy we fell in love with at the Senior Bowl, we've telling you guys for months he could be the next Dallas Goedert. I don't think it gets a whole lot better than him landing there in New Orleans. I thought that was an interesting day 2 development that I'm not sure got as much news as it should have. And then Alex, I think kind of from, an unorthodox perspective here, we're talking fantasy. So we end up focusing so much on the skill players, but we put so much work into these offensive linemen. And, over the years, we've learned that, very simply put, we prefer, if we have our choice, that our fantasy players play on teams with, at least above average offensive lines. It's just for a whole slew of reasons. So, there's a lot of teams who did well for themselves at the offensive line, especially some of the teams that went early, like the Giants, the Browns, the Jets, the Buccaneers, and the Titans. All of those teams drafted round 1 offensive tackles. We saw the Dolphins go with 2 offensive tackles, one in round 1, one in round 2. We saw the Saints on the heels of taking Eric McCoy last year out of A&M, a Senior Bowler we really liked that kind of had that center guard versatility. The Saints went back in on Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan with that same type of versatility this year. So they continue to fortify the interior line there in New Orleans. And then, Minnesota, they went offensive tackle. I think it was round 2 this year. And we just got to remember that was after they added Garrett Bradbury. And, we'll see, the jury's probably still out on Drew Samia out of OU, but they added those 2 guys last year that we liked. So a whole slew of teams there. I mean, you got to think of there's a lot of fantasy players involved in the Giants and the Browns and the Jets and the Bucks and the Titans and the Saints and the Vikings. Like, these are all teams that it was very good news that they addressed and continue to focus on improving their offensive lines. And then, Alex, I guess to kind of complete that point, we do so much work at the Senior Bowl. I really thought teams like the Baltimore Ravens, who took Tyree Phillips, Denver Broncos, who took Lloyd Cushenberry, the Seahawks, who took Damian Lewis. I know you made a tweet on about, I think it was Houston taking Josh Jones, Las Vegas taking John Simpson out of Clemson.
Did Houston take? I thought the Cardinals took Josh Jones.
Houston or Arizona?
Josh Jones out of he's from the U of H, but I think
that's what
Arizona
took him. Out of U of H and got drafted by Arizona. Yeah, that's what I've got here. Houston is where he's from. Arizona is where he was drafted. And Jacksonville with another Senior Bowler, Ben Barch. So that all of those teams addressed offensive line in the middle rounds with quality Senior Bowlers. I thought those were teams that improved their offensive line at value. I mean, we saw Denver win in on Dalton Reisner from the Senior Bowl last year. All of a sudden, they've still got, I think it's Garrett Bowles. They're building an interesting offensive line there as they've surrounded Drew Lock with just a bevy of weapons. They're like seeing the Ravens, love seeing the Seahawks and the Cardinals, the Raiders going back in on offensive line. And then I guess kind of last but not least, before we get to fantasy, Alex, also stuck out to me that the 49ers, the Ravens, and the Buccaneers had monster drafts and just in somewhat different ways. But, good teams that have added a lot of good players that really, really, I thought went bananas over the weekend. And, I think you could also put Jacksonville, who's kind of rebuilding the roster on the fly. They had a pretty damn good draft too, Alex. They kind of filled needs with high-end players across the roster. I thought it was interesting, though. They were unable to trade Leonard Fournette. We heard that the Dolphins were in talks to see if they could make a deal before they ultimately went with Matt Breida. So, obviously the Jaguars wanted too much in return for a guy with basically 1 year left on his contract, even though it's at a cheap price. right in the midst of such a deep running back class. So I think he's really interested to see how Jacksonville's going to walk this thing back with Leonard Fournette. I mean, in so many ways, I think it's in both of their interests for him to just get run into the ground and have a big year this next year if he stays with the team. That said, there could be a midseason trade with Fournette. And while I don't think that's so difficult with a running back, sometimes that's something to keep in mind, can set a player back in fantasy over the course of the season a little bit. And then I think there's an outside chance that if Jacksonville is just soured on him and keeps him, but they want to start developing some of their other guys, that maybe it devolves a little bit to RBBC. But I just think when I game out most situations in my head, if Fournette's going to be in Jacksonville for another year, I think it makes perfect sense for him to want to have a big year, and perfect sense for them to want to go ahead and, grind him into the ground with as many touches as possible before they move on. And then Alex, before we get to the Dynasty Rookie Draft cheat sheet, some of my observations there, I thought you just pulled off a really interesting trade in our SiriusXM Experts Dynasty League. And I think that will provide some interesting talking points. Maybe you could go over that for a second. Yeah,
I felt like the cat that ate the canary, man. I didn't think he was going to take it. Basically, we were picking at 1.08 in a deep 14-team league, IDP league, and it's run by our program director at Sirius, Matt Deutsch, and a ton of different producers across SiriusXM from the different channels like NFL Radio and guys like Nick Costos, who now is – what the hell's Costos with now? It's like CBS Sports or something, but he used to be a producer on NFL Radio. Anyway. Bunch of these guys, man, these producers that book us for their spots on their shows and shit, and like Jamie Oppenheim, he used to be with NBA Radio, and he's the commissioner of the league. Or is he the commissioner? Or is Deutsch the commissioner? Deutsch kind of came up with the rules.
Jamie is the commissioner.
I think that Deutsch is some kind of
trade off with.
Yeah, no, yeah. I just think Deutsch is some kind of shadow commish, though, possibly. But regardless. Yes, with Oppenheim, we were at 1.08, and it came down to, Cam Akers had fallen. And I'm not even going to say who we're interested in taking, but we think that one of the players who we're interested in because those guys could be watching right now. But a couple of players we're interested in taking, we think that we could get at 2.01. So I moved down from 1.08 to 2.01. And had him throw in Drew Lock, and also bumped us up from 4.04 to 3.04. So
it's 108. I thought we were 106, so that's an even better deal.
108. It would have been Cam Akers, or it would have been Joe Burrow there at that spot in this particular league, where it's a 6-point quarterback touchdown league, and they get eaten up really quickly with these particular drafters. So you have to take quarterbacks a little earlier than usual. And just thought it was a good trade. I figured if we were thinking about taking Joe Burrow there, we could throw a dart on Drew Lock. I mean, with everything that's been, he doesn't have many excuses at this point. Melvin Gordon is there now. Like
Drew Lock this year.
I mean, Melvin Gordon, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, Albert O, improved offensive line. His second year in the league, a division with bad defenses in the AFC West. I mean, what can you? It's like he doesn't have any excuses.
I'm gonna have massive exposure to Drew Lock this year in fantasy. He's a guy that we're going to be very dialed in on.
Well, but he's a guy who, right? But here's the thing: it's not like it's massive exposure to Drew Lock and redraft. It comes with zero opportunity cost. You just take him with the 14th round pick, and it's like you take your quarterback who you're a little more comfortable with in the 10th or the 11th. You could take Drew Lock in round 14 before you take kicker and defense, and just see what happens. Very good chance he could not be good. I mean, our evaluation on him was that he was going to take time and that he definitely had some nice characteristics. We saw him through the whole week of the Senior Bowl last year. I was super worried when he came in this year and they expected him to contribute, but he was actually much better than I thought. He was better than I gave him credit for already as a rookie. I would think that with all of these weapons, that's a guy who can do something this next year. So we'll see. We always said that he's a good developmental prospect. He's had some time to develop now. So I did not mind getting Drew Lock on that team, especially considering we only had Jimmy Garoppolo as our other quarterback. So we definitely needed some quarterback help.
And then we got a 2 in return. Was it 1-2 or 2 2s, Alex?
No, it was so we gave 1.08. We got back 2.01, Drew Lock, and then we flipped our 4th rounder for his 3rd rounder.
Oh, dude, that's a monster trade, especially Drew Lock's value just, astronomical rise here poster. I'll tell you, if you are of the persuasion of the late round quarterback strategy on an annual basis, like I could live with Drew Lock being the only quarterback that I drafted at the end of the draft. The
reason why you say that that's okay is not because we're just putting all of our chips on fucking Drew Lock. That isn't the case. But what the case is, it's like, Phillip Rivers won't be drafted. Kirk Cousins wasn't drafted last year. Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Darnold and all these assholes won't be drafted, right? So if Drew Lock is nothing and it's a big nothing burger and you can't do anything with this, you drop him and you pick up another guy that you're totally comfortable with. Like that's the beauty of the late round quarterback.
People need to understand the reason we're interested in Drew Lock is obviously they've added the weapons, and to your point, Alex, he cleaned up a lot of the stuff we were concerned about. He evidently cleaned up a lot of the stuff we were concerned about faster than we'd expected. He looked pretty comfortable and more in rhythm. With better mechanics there late in the season. But the reason why he has so much allure, in addition to that, is you can't forget he had a lot of Josh Allen, a lot of Carson Wentz to his profile. This is a guy who's going to make some hay on the ground potentially as well. And that is, I think he could very well be the next Josh Allen in fantasy. A guy that sometimes leaves stuff to be desired in terms of like his real NFL quarterback play, but for fantasy, there's quite a bit of upside there. So anyway, I think we spent enough time on that, but I thought that was a great trade you pulled off, man. To me, you're not losing much going down from 108 to 201.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. There's a couple guys we're really hoping fall.
Right. We'll still find somebody that we like, of course. Maybe we can trade out of the pick. We're not totally hamstrung at that point. We get Drew Lock, and then look, I think it's a big deal getting that bump back up into, I think you said the 3rd round on that other
early 3rd, as opposed to like 4.08 all the way to 3.04.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal.
All right, let's talk about the rookie cheat sheet here and some of the things that you touched on, Byron. You talked at the beginning. It's a 2-horse race between Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathon Taylor. I feel like for coming into next year, there's going to be no doubt that I'll have Clyde Edwards-Helaire ranked above Jonathon Taylor for redraft. With that being said, Jonathon Taylor, 2 of my favorite prospects of the last 12 years we've been doing this, Jonathon Taylor and Quentin Nelson have now joined forces, and they work in a a synchronistic manner together, right? 2 of my favorite prospects that we've evaluated are now directly tied to one another over the course of the long period of time. Like I talked about on the podcast, the Day 2 podcast. Jonathon Taylor is going to render Marlon Mack completely useless. It's at some point. He came in there. He said, "This is my town. This is my city. This is my house. Marlon Mack can get the hell out of here." As our boy Sully from Houston said on Twitter, "You're a special teamer now." But I don't think it's going to happen immediately, right? It feels like there's going to take some time for Jonathon Taylor to completely take over that role. I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to happen immediately. I know that everybody's talking about the Damian Williams stuff and the fact that they're still going to, some people still like Darrell Williams, and some people say, I can't believe some people are still holding out hope for Darwin Thompson and some of these other guys. But when you take Clyde Edwards-Helaire that early, you talk about how you're the GM who says that he thinks he's a Brian Westbrook and that the head coach thinks that it's a better Brian Westbrook. The head coach just happened to be the head coach for Brian Westbrook. You got guys like Louis Riddick just going on NFL Network just saying that the Kansas City Chiefs getting Clyde Edwards-Helaire is it's an unfair advantage. I think it's hard for Dynasty because I think Jonathon Taylor in the long run might be able to be maybe the more valuable overall runner. He like we've talked about before, that's a Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott type of profile. He lives there with the most high profile best backs in the whole National Football League as far as our evaluation on him. Whereas Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a very specialized skill set that we were very intrigued by. Clyde Edwards-Helaire just happened to fall to the one spot where that one very specialized skill set fits perfectly into what that offense does and happens to be the most efficient most prolific, most fantasy-friendly offense in the entire National Football League. And if we're talking about PPR setups, it's hard for redraft to get away from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. For Dynasty, it's a 2-horse race, as you said. It's just really hard. If I'm choosing the top of a draft, I don't know which one I'm taking. So can we just start the conversation there? What you think is most prudent with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor? Because clearly they need to be 1 and 2. Do you have a preference one way or the other? It's almost like I'm happy to have either pick.
Yeah, so that gives somebody at 1.01 maybe a little flexibility if there's, I don't know how many people are going to trade 101 and 102, but I guess you have a little flexibility there at the top of drafts. I see it pretty much the same way as you, Alex. I don't ever expect Edwards-Helaire to get the volume that Taylor is eventually going to get, but on the other hand, I'm just flat out buying into Patrick Mahomes. I'm buying into Andy Reid. The PPR, the receptions themselves in these PPR formats are going to basically offset or neutralize the difference in volume I think that we'll see between the two players. And I love the marriage of Jonathan Taylor with that offensive line in Indianapolis. I just have concerns about the quarterback situation, long-term there. And this year, I think, you still look at 250 touches easy for Taylor this year, maybe 275. I think Marlon Mack will be a guy that comes in at like 150, 175 touches, something along those lines potentially. I mean, they plan on running the ball a lot, but I just think in the end, man, it's difficult not to buy into Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense. And if it's me on the clock, I'm taking Edwards-Helaire at number 1 in Dynasty and in redraft.
We got Kip C in the chat saying if you're around 1.03 or 1.04 in a rookie draft, and if you're not hamstrung at running back, would you be looking to make the jump to 2? Or would you wait? Because once we get to it brings up what we do at 3, and I think at 3 in Dynasty, that's where I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Byron. And of course, we're not going to give away the whole cheat sheet here. You can download it later on today at RosterWatch.com and ensuing versions as we get more information and more intel, and as we really wrap our heads around this. But at that point, Cam Akers is in consideration now that he has the landing spot for the Los Angeles Rams. I don't care what people are saying about Darrell Henderson on our Twitter. People are saying it's disrespectful for us to even put out polls indicating that maybe Cam Akers could take the touch lead over Darrell Henderson. And I look at him, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like, of course he's going to take the touch lead. It's just a matter of how much he's going to take. Cam Akers has swindled Darrell Henderson. He has swindled. He's swindled Malcolm Brown. He's certainly swindled John Kelley. Cam Akers is the guy there now. That's their guy. They're gonna run with him. He's their Todd Gurley replacement. But J.K. Dobbins now is the better prospect, and he goes to the Baltimore Ravens, where we've seen what a running quarterback like Lamar Jackson could do for. Not only for Mark Ingram, we've seen what that zone read scheme and the different threats that the quarterback can bring running the football do to open up lanes for these runners. Whenever J.K. Dobbins gets lanes opened up for him, he is unbelievably dynamic, one of the most explosive running backs in this entire class. I know we don't have the testing measurements on him. We've talked about it time and time again. His spark measurables from the opening back in 2016, the only guy that was even close to him was Jeffrey Okudah, who tested like who is another maniacal athlete himself. What about Akers and Dobbins? And then also, does CeeDee Lamb begin to creep into the conversation for you there at that point in time?
Well,
because that's the sheet. I'm not saying to talk about the sheet or the way the sheet's diagram, because we're talking about the skeleton right now. But Akers and Dobbins, I'll just say I feel like CeeDee comes into consideration at some point in there. But with Akers and Dobbins, how do you see this? Because I think in redraft, I like Akers better than Dobbins. I'm not sure about Dynasty, because in 2021, the Ravens can and will surely get out of the deal with Mark Ingram, right? And I think Dobbins long-term in Dynasty, I just love him so much more as a prospect than I love Cam Akers. But Cam Akers comes into more opportunity immediately. How much does that immediate opportunity weigh for you versus the event? In Dynasty, we own these guys for life. How much does the immediate opportunity weigh in your mind against J.K. Dobbins' long-term opportunity in that offense with Lamar Jackson?
Well, I'm gonna leave most of the sheet to the imagination here, but I got several thoughts just on all of those topics. So the poll that we ran on Twitter seemed like kind of settled in at a 70-30 split between Akers and Darrell Henderson is what the majority of, or plurality of folks felt was appropriate. I thought that was a reasonable starting point. I agree with your analysis on Akers. He couldn't have landed in a better spot, and he's the lead guy. He's the girly replacement. It's a perfect fit. It's really the best place that he could have landed. My other thought is,
and you don't worry about offensive line troubles with him is the most beautiful.
No, just because, in the scheme they're going to run. I get, there's a lot we can do. Cam Akers is a very good prospect. I think this is the scheme he fits best in. He's going to just press the hole, get to the hole, use his speed, get downhill. That's how you want to use Cam Akers. So it's a beautiful fit. For no apparent reason. I mean, we can probably speculate by deduction, but through our interactions, the Rams appear to hate Darrell Henderson about as much as they hated John Kelley, another darling of the draft world and of the dynasty and fantasy world. Now, Henderson is somebody that they invested quite a significant more amount of draft capital in. So you would think that maybe by default, there's some differences there, but the vibe you get every time you interact with the Rams is the same vibe you get that they gave off about John Kelley, which ultimately wasn't good. And look, I mean, to put a 3rd round pick in and turn around and go with the 2nd rounder this year, to me, that says quite a bit. Now, from the beta version that you've sent me of the Dynasty Rookie Draft cheat sheet, we'll be publishing here shortly for our pro subscribers. I love where you've built in the cross-positional exit ramp around this juncture of the draft. So I don't want to mess with any of that. I want to leave that alone. And I understand exactly why you have who you have, where you have them. And you've actually laid out the case pretty well here as we talk about some of these guys at the top of the sheet. Now,
okay,
me personally, and we're talking dynasty, I'm giving very strong consideration to giving Dobbins a bump.
I mean, I kind of think for dynasty, I kind of think so too.
Me personally on the clock, I'm probably giving Dobbins a bump here.
So do you think he just okay? Well, we can talk off camera about whether he actually gets the bump on the sheet, and if he does, whether the cross positional exit ramp stays the same or whether the structure changes. And you guys who are pro members know just what we're talking about with this stuff. But the cheat sheet's an intuitive visual sheet that gives you options at some junctures in the draft depending on your needs and guarantees an expert quality draft every time. Okay. What about so we can talk about all that later. Is there anything you just want to get off your chest about Keyshawn Vaughn just in general?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, you know how much I love Keyshawn Vaughn. Obviously been one of the people on the very forefront of kind of leading the march.
I think that you started it. I mean, it's a big hype train now, but you're the engineer.
Yeah, and everybody's now going back and acting like they've had him as their number 2 guy since the very beginning. Funny thing is you never heard any of those folks crowing about it pre-draft. That said, I think I'm going to come with maybe something you didn't expect here. So I like where Vaughn is on the sheet. I think we were very much on the same page there. I think we should caution folks, as much as I think Vaughn has a big opportunity here and landed in a spectacular spot. Keyshawn Vaughn averaged 18.9 touches a game last year at Vanderbilt. Before that, he was mainly a 15 touch per game guy. And I've been giving a lot of comparisons to Kerryon Johnson. Now, I was trying to be modest. because the guy I really want to comp him to, now that the cat's out of the bag a little bit, is Keyshawn Vaughn has a chance to be Alvin Kamara-like. Remember how Alvin Kamara sheds and keeps his balance in the second level? It's in a sneaky way, and nobody thought he was that good out of it coming out of college. He was a third-round pick in a deep running back class. So there's something there. But that said, even Alvin Kamara, when they have their way, he's really a 15, 16, 18 touch per game guy. So does Vaughn have workhorse 3-down capability? I believe that he potentially does. If I'm being realistic, and this is coming, and to me, when it's coming from somebody who's like one of his biggest cheerleaders, one of his biggest truthers, to me, these are honest reservations to have. And it's just, I think the reasonable expectation for Vaughn is that he's ultimately more of a 15 to 18 touch per game player if he really gets up and running the way we'd like. And, big picture, I think he's somewhere in the 10 to 20 touch per game range, 10 to 18 touch per game range, depending on how his development goes and the trajectory of his early career. So in that offense, in that division,
that's fine. As we've seen it with Kamara, it's the same division. Yeah.
I just think, in full disclosure, to me, that's a reasonable way to look at his profile moving forward. There's a lot of hype there, Alex. And when there's a lot of hype comes a lot of, when there's a lot of hype is when people overpay for things.
Oh yeah.
And as much as I love Vaughn,
we all know you don't. You hate overpaying for things.
Yeah, it's not what we want to do, right?
Yeah. And I'd say that you hate it more than most, though.
Yeah, well, definitely true, man. No reason for it. It's a waste of utility, man. You've got a finite amount of that. So, I feel the excitement. Just there's pandemonium right now over Keyshawn Vaughn, and of course that thrills me, makes me very, very excited. But I feel like it also is that somebody who's done so much work on Vaughn and wants to be an unbiased purveyor, to be on the front lines for RosterWatch Nation, all our pro subscribers, we got to do the honest thing and the right thing. And the honest evaluation is, I don't think we should chalk Vaughn up for some monster workhorse role, right out of the gate. And then in terms of dynasty, you have to consider that in a couple of years from now, it's going to be an unsettled quarterback situation. Now we're going to have a chance to build a lot of value early with Vaughn and maybe, address that situation as that comes more to a head, which is obviously you want to get your value up early in your dynasty players. There's a big, allure to that, but all things we need to consider. So overall, I love where we have him, but if you wanted me to say my piece on Vaughn, there it is.
Okay. Well, I like it. Let's talk about a little bit farther down the board here at the wide receiver position. I'm going back and forth a lot, and from what you see on that beta sheet that I sent you, I've actually flipped Jalen Reagor and Justin Jefferson. Can you tell me how you see those guys? And my reasoning is, well, for one, I've been in dynasty leagues since the draft. I've been on the clock, and I've thought to myself, I want Justin Jefferson more. And the reason why is simply because, well, I like Justin Jefferson better as a prospect. I believe if we have our let me just open up our staff rankings from our pre-draft. Yeah, as a staff, we have a consensus one spot higher on Justin Jefferson. And if you look at what Minnesota has done, both these guys have first-round draft capital. Justin Jefferson comes in more ready. I like Jalen Reagor. I've heard, we've heard a little bit from some people behind the scenes that maybe even Philly thinks that he could take a little while to get up to speed there. Not that matters that much for dynasty, but Philly also did take didn't they took John Hightower, who, that's a guy.
5 maybe.
Yeah, that's a guy who can, but that's another one of these guys who I don't have his exact 40 pulled up, but he does. Let's just see. I'll pull up right now. Yeah, if you just look at the film, you could tell Hightower's super fast. And then they also
John Hightower ran a 4.43, 6'1", 189 pounds, 9 6/8 hands, 34.5-inch arms, a 4.43 out of Boise State, a senior. So yeah, John Hightower has a pretty nice profile there.
Yeah, and then I forget who else they took, but it was. let's see. So I put him on. Was it Quez? Was it Quez Watkins? It was somebody else. Yeah, Quez Watkins. So they definitely addressed it a good bit. Whereas Minnesota, I mean, they took Justin Jefferson, and this Justin Jefferson is Adam Thielen, Tajay Sharp, and they're moving on. Justin Jefferson is good. How do you make nuts and bolts with Justin Jefferson and Jalen Reagor for Dynasty if you're picking in that kind of area?
Well, this is interesting to me because we spoke Saturday morning, and this was a little bit of the conversation I was putting out there. And at that time, you had like a white hot take on Reagor, just as the rest of the industry did. So you always have a close pulse on this. I'm curious. It sounds like you're cooling on Reagor a little bit. Is the rest of the industry cooling on Reagor after they were just,
I don't think
lathered
so.
up for him?
I don't think so.
Friday.
I think it was Saturday morning and Friday night.
It was Thursday night,
Friday morning. It feels like maybe maybe part of me saying, well, what about, part of me saying like, hey, let's consider where we put Reagor here, and maybe it needs to be higher than we think. Probably had to do something with just hearing everybody else say it and stuff. But I mean, I spent all yesterday morning, out on my kayak, like fishing. I didn't get a single bite, even though the conditions were absolutely perfect. And the whole time I was just sitting there thinking to myself, just a time to clear my mind and just think about these guys. And it just came to me then. I said, "What? Justin Jefferson's awesome." And it's not, once you write everything out and you list everything out and you look at the pros and the cons. I mean, do we really think that a quarterback situation with Carson Wentz is that much better than a quarterback situation with Kirk Cousins? And just, like the lack of competition for targets as well. The fact that he's a better prospect. I mean, what is it? Just that we think that Jalen Reagor is just that dynamic? Justin Jefferson ran a faster 40.
Minnesota drafted another wide receiver as well. I think we'll get to him in a little bit. I mean, Justin Jefferson, I believe, is going to get big volume right out of the gate. So I really don't have a problem with that slotting, especially since sounds like you've spent a lot of time talking about that. In my initial tiers, I have Reagor at the bottom of tier 2. And I have Jefferson basically at the top of tier 3. So, but I don't have a problem. If you've got a strong preference for Jefferson at this point, I don't really have a problem with that. But I think they're closely ranked. Coming into this conversation, I would have had Reagor slightly above Jefferson. But
there's also and Eagles fan brings up a good point in the chat that I didn't even mention, but it also went into my thinking when I was out on the boat, like the Marquise Goodwin stuff. I know it's only for probably a year, but it shows that they're going to try and do a bunch of things to try and stretch the field. And it just feels to me like Jalen Reagor is going to be part of that. Great for the actual scheme, much like you talked about with Henry Ruggs. I'm not sure he's going to be a fantasy superstar in year one. Whereas, what Trashman was saying is that Justin Jefferson is going to be a guy that's going to be involved, especially in PPR. He's going to bring, at least it feels like he has a much safer floor with a relatively similar upside. So that's where I am right now with Justin Jefferson. I'm not sure are we going to talk about another Minnesota wide receiver?
Pretty good.
But I don't know if we do.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
Okay.
I'm thinking about another receiver from the University of Minnesota.
Okay. But before we do, there's just a couple more key points I want to talk about. One would be in this tier of running backs after we get through the top tier and we get through another certain tier where you're going to basically have to go wide receiver or quarterback. There comes a tier of running backs that comes into focus. And whenever it does, I'm just, as much as we love Antonio Gibson, how much do you like the landing spot in Washington? Is it something to where we need to consider maybe an A.J. Dillon who after Green Bay takes him in the second round and continues to show that they absolutely hate Aaron Jones? Is A.J. Dillon somebody to be considered there? Is Josh Kelley somebody to be considered there? Josh Kelley already comes in and pees right in Justin Jackson's Cheerios, right? And takes his job. Don't you think? It's not quite a Jonathan Taylor come in and pee on the rug situation, but I think Josh Kelley comes. He's too nice to pee on Justin Jackson's rug, but figuratively, he's going to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Josh Kelley got lucky and landed in a damn good spot, relative to where you started to get concerned about his value based on where he was sliding to in the draft and the historical indicator that is of, fantasy performance and the opportunities these guys will receive. But fortunately, I do think Josh Kelley, kind of like, there's a handful of these guys that maybe slid a little bit, but ended up in such good spots. It gave them a bump there. In terms of Gibson, I get the concern on the landing spot. My feeling is he's just too high upside of a wild card. I like where you have him currently. That's about where I had him. I thought it was a comfortable place. I see where your head's at. On the flip side, I was gonna again not make a strong argument, but I thought there was a case that AJ Dillon could come down a spot or two. But in your mind, you think he can come up a spot or two. So maybe he's in just the right place. So I'm happy.
How does Zack Moss fit in, for the Bills fit into that? So we're talking about Antonio Gibson, Washington Redskins, AJ Dillon, Green Bay Packers, Josh Kelley, Chargers, Zack Moss, Buffalo Bills. I don't consider Darrington Evans in that tier really in Tennessee, even though who knows? I mean, if they're trying to keep a little bit of a tread off of Derrick Henry's tires, which I'm not sure that they would be this year, but certainly, he could be what Dion Lewis was supposed to be plus last year. I mean, he's certainly an awesome player. But with Zack Moss, are you worried at all about Devin Singletary? And do you think that Zack Moss is? I mean, I think Zack Moss was PFF's number one running back in this class.
Yeah, so I had Gibson in a tier of his own, and then in the next tier I have Zack Moss and Josh Kelley in a tier together. And I have a preference for Moss there just because I think that is going to be a two-man show pretty much right out of the gate. And, you talk about A.J. Dillon getting the goal line work. I think we can make a strong case that that's what Moss is going to walk into in Buffalo. And instead of competing with a couple other running backs, I think it's just Singletary and Moss. Whereas Green Bay, you could argue it's going to be 2-3 guys, and you definitely can't trust what LaFleur is going to do with that committee. And so, and then, I think Singletary is too good for Moss to come in and get any kind of lion's share, but I do think he's first of all, he's turns in immediately one of the best handcuffs in the league, if not a standalone flex player. And then I think he does get that goal line appeal right off the bat. So I like Moss, and then like you said, Kelley he landed in just the right spot, man. I mean, we getting all the lip service constantly from Anthony Lynn about how much he likes Justin Jackson, but we also heard him say that Tyrod Taylor's not a bridge quarterback. So we don't put a whole lot of stock into that. I do think there's a chance it can be a 3-man rotation for a while in Los Angeles. That could be tricky and may take a while to sort itself out, and might not ever sort itself out. But you got to like Joshua Kelley's chances there over time to get an opportunity, and then I think to show out pretty well once he does. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. And I had A.J. Dillon more in that Darrington Evans tier you're talking about, just as a complimentary player who could get a pretty good role right out of the gate. I'm just not entirely sure, but you make a good case. Right. I mean, Dillon.
I'm gonna get it cleaned up. I'll get it cleaned up. I think, but you like Moss at the top of that tier with Kelley and those types.
I think he's an important player at this point with a pretty clear situation.
We can end it there, I think. Is that good? I mean, is that okay?
Yeah, that's if you're good, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, we have a lot of time to talk about this, and so we'll end it there. Thanks to everybody for watching the stream. If you can, please comment on YouTube underneath here. Just write a comment, any comment. It helps immensely. If you could subscribe, you'll get alerts whenever we go live on these streams. And also, please make sure to find the Roster Watch Podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen. We don't stream all our pods, so there's a chance you could miss some if you're just watching here on YouTube. Final reminder, you can get the best ball cheat sheet, which I haven't updated yet. That'll probably be the next day or two after I get the Dynasty cheat sheet up. We'll have the Dynasty cheat sheet today. Of course, all the rookie profiles and everything else, all at rosterwatch.com. So, again, thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you for all the comments. We love you. We'll be back here again early in the week to talk some more.